The Ring of Echoes. The discoveries the dusty attic of the Whitmore estate held secrets that had been sleeping for over a century. Sarah Chen, a freelance appraiser, carefully navigated between cobweb-draped furniture and forgotten trunks, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. She had been called to assess the contents of the recently inherited property, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to discover. In the far corner, beneath a moth-eaten sheet, stood an ornate easel holding a portrait that seemed to watch her approach. The painting depicted a young man, perhaps 25 years old, with piercing blue eyes and dark hair swept back in the fashion of the early 1900s. His clothing suggested wealth, a well-tailored suit with a crisp white collar. At first glance, it appeared to be just another forgotten family portrait from the Edwardian era. Sarah lifted her camera to document the piece when something caught her eye. The young man's left hand rested casually on what appeared to be a marble pedestal, and on his ring finger gleamed an unusual piece of jewelry. The ring seemed almost alive in the painted light, its surface appearing to shift and shimmer despite being rendered in oils. She leaned closer, adjusting her flashlight. The ring was unlike anything she had seen before. A band of what looked like black metal inlaid with symbols that seemed to dance before her eyes. Even more peculiar, the ring appeared to be glowing with an inner light that seemed impossible for a painting from night. Are you fascinated by mysterious historical artifacts? Subscribe to our newsletter for more incredible stories of hidden treasures and unexplained phenomena from the past. Sarah photographed the portrait from multiple angles, making sure to capture detailed shots of the ring. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that the young man's eyes were following her movements. The sensation was so strong that she found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to find someone watching from the shadows. The signature in the bottom right corner read, Hachio Blackwood, Minted and Dothered. But Sarah had never heard of this art. The technique was masterful, rivaling the work of John Singer Sargent. Yet the name Blackwood didn't appear in any of her mental catalogs of period painters. As she prepared to leave the attic, Sarah noticed something else that made her pause. Scattered around the base of the easel were several sheets of aged paper covered in what appeared to be notes written in multiple hands. She gathered them carefully, noting that they seemed to span several decades based on the varying ink colors and handwriting styles. The first note, written in faded brown ink, was dated 1913. The ring continues to appear in my dreams. I see him standing in places that don't exist, speaking words I cannot understand. Mother says I should burn the portrait, but I cannot bring myself to destroy Father's final commission. Another note, this one in blue ink, from what appeared to be the Nintietendis Quarentes, read, Found the portrait in the attic today. The ring, it's exactly as grandmother described. I understand now why she kept it hidden. Some things are better left undisturbed. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she read the final note, written in modern ballpoint pen and dated just 5 years earlier. The dreams have started again. He's trying to tell me something about the ring. I can feel it calling to me even from up here in the attic. I've decided to seal this room. Let the next generation deal with this burden. The handwriting on the last note was shaky, desperate. Sarah realized this must have been written by the recently deceased owner of the estate, Marcus Whitmore, whose family had hired her to appraise the contents. As she descended from the attic, portrait and notes in hand, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the ring. There was something about it that defied explanation, the way it seemed to glow with its own light, the intricate symbols that appeared to move when she wasn't looking directly at them, and most disturbing of all, the growing certainty that the young man in the portrait was somehow aware of her presence. That evening, in her small apartment overlooking the city, Sarah spread the notes across her kitchen table and began to research. She started with the artist, Blackwood, but found no record of any painter by that name working in Nintot. It was as if he had never existed. Next, she turned her attention to the Whitmore family history. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The family had a long history of unexplained deaths, disappearances, and what historical records diplomatically termed the nervous condition. The pattern seemed to repeat every generation, always involving a young family member who became obsessed with something they claimed to have found in the family collection. As midnight approached, Sarah found herself drawn back to the portrait. She had propped it against her bedroom wall, and now, in the dim light of her desk lamp, the ring seemed more luminous than ever. The young man's expression, which had appeared merely contemplative in the daylight, now seemed urgent, almost pleading. She was about to turn away when she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. The symbols on the ring, they were moving, not dramatically, but with a subtle shifting that reminded her of text scrolling across a screen. As she watched, transfixed, the symbols began to form patterns that looked almost like words, though in no language she recognized. Sarah rubbed her eyes, certain she was imagining things, but when she looked again, the movement was even more pronounced. The ring was definitely trying to communicate it something, and somehow, impossibly, she was beginning to understand. The next morning brought no relief from the strange dreams that had plagued Sarah's sleep. She had dreamed of walking through corridors that seemed to exist outside of time, following the sound of a voice that spoke in the same unknown language she had seen forming in the ring's symbols. The young man from the portrait had been there, always just ahead of her, gesturing for her to follow. Determined to find rational explanations, Sarah dove into her research with renewed vigor. She contacted colleagues at universities, museums, and auction houses, sending them photographs of the portrait and asking if anyone had encountered similar work or could identify the mysterious H. Blackwood. Elizabeth Hartwell, a professor of art history at Columbia University, was the first to respond. Her email was brief but intriguing. Sarah, I've never seen work quite like this, but the style reminds me of some pieces I encountered during my research into occult art of the early 20s. There was a small movement of artists who claimed to paint visions rather than reality. Most of their work has been lost or destroyed. Can we meet? That afternoon, Sarah found herself in Dr. Hartwell's cluttered office, surrounded by books on esoteric art and supernatural phenomena. The professor, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and silver hair, examined the photographs with intense concentration. The technique is extraordinary, Dr. Hartwell murmured, adjusting her glasses. But it's this ring that's truly fascinating. See these symbols? They're not decorative, they're functional. This appears to be a form of sigil magic, a way of encoding intentions or communications into visual symbols. Sarah felt a chill. You're saying this is some kind of magical artifact? I'm saying that the artist believed it was. Hartwell replied carefully. There was a group in the early Ninotendos called the Order of the Eternal Moment. They believed that certain objects could serve as bridges between our world and other places. They commissioned artists to create what they called anchor paintings, portraits that could supposedly maintain connections to these other realms. She pulled out a leather-bound journal and flipped through yellowed pages. Here I found a reference to H. Blackwood. He wasn't a traditional artist at all. He was a medium who claimed he could paint portraits of people from other dimensions. Other times, the order hired him to create several pieces, but most were destroyed when the group disbanded after a series of incidents. What kind of incidents? Hartwell's expression grew grave. Disappearances. Members of the order began vanishing, always after spending time with one of Blackwood's paintings. The authorities investigated, but they could never find any evidence of foul play. People simply stepped out of existence. Discover more spine-chilling tales of supernatural art and mysterious disappearances. Join our community of mystery enthusiasts and get exclusive access to rare historical accounts. Sarah felt the room grow cold. And you think this portrait might be one of those paintings? I think it's possible. The Whitmore family has money that goes back generations. All money. The kind that could afford to commission work from groups like the Order. And the pattern of strange occurrences in their family history certainly fits. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment with photocopies of Dr. Harwell's research and growing sense of unease. The portrait seemed to dominate her small living space, and she found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on anything else. The ring's glow had become more pronounced, and the symbols were now moving in complex patterns that hurt her eyes to follow. She tried to work on other appraisals, but her attention kept drifting back to the painting. The young man's expression had changed again. Where before he had seemed urgent, now he appeared almost desperate. His painted eyes seemed to track her movements around the room, and she could swear she heard whispers when the apartment was completely silent. Around midnight, Sarah made the decision that would change everything. She approached the portrait and spoke directly to it, feeling foolish but unable to stop herself. "What do you want?" she asked the painted figures. "What are you trying to tell me?" The response was immediate and terrifying. The symbols on the ring began spinning rapidly, forming words that appeared in her mind rather than her eyes. "Help me! I'm trapped. The ring is the key. Find the others." Sarah stumbled backward, her heart racing. The portrait was definitely communicating with her, but the implications were beyond anything she was prepared to accept. She grabbed her phone and called Dr. Hartwell, despite the late hour. "You need to know more about the Order of the Eternal Moment," she said without preamble, when the professor answered. "And I need to know what happened to the other paintings." There was a long pause. "So are you experiencing something unusual with the portrait?" "You could say that." "Then we need to meet first thing in the morning." "And Sarah, don't spend the night alone with that painting. There are some things that are better faced in daylight, with other people around." But it was too late for that advice. As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that the portrait had changed again. The young man was no longer looking at her. He was looking past her, at something behind her in the room. His expression was one of pure terror. Slowly, Sarah turned around, and what she saw made her understand that her ordeal was just beginning. The reflection in her bedroom mirror showed not her own face, but that of the young man from the portrait. Sarah blinked hard, certain she was hallucinating, but when she looked again, he was still there, his lips moving as if trying to speak. The ring on his finger pulsed with the same otherworldly light as in the painting. Sarah backed away from the mirror, her rational mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The reflection followed her movements, but with a delay, as if the image was traveling across some vast distance to reach her. When she raised her hand, the young man in the mirror did the same, but his gesture came a heartbeat later. "This isn't possible," she whispered, but even as she spoke, she knew she was beyond the realm of possibility. The young man in the mirror seemed to hear her. His mouth moved more urgently, and suddenly, Sarah could hear his voice, faint and distorted, as if coming through water. "My name is Thomas Ashford. I've been trapped here since night. The ring, it's a conduit. You have to help me." Sarah sank onto her bed, staring at the impossible reflection. "How is this happening? The painting is an anchor." Thomas's voice grew slightly clearer. "Blackwood created it to bind me to your world, but something went wrong. Instead of creating a bridge, it created a prison. I've been caught between dimensions for over a century. Why me? Why can I see you now?" Thomas's reflection smiled sadly. "You have the sensitivity. Not everyone can perceive the connections between worlds. Blackwood had it, and so do you. But there's more. You're in danger. The Order didn't disband because of disappearances. They were destroyed by something they accidentally released. Something that's been hunting for the remaining anchor paintings ever since." As if summoned by his words, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood freeze. Footsteps in her hallway, slow and deliberate. But she lived on the 7th floor of a secure building, and she hadn't heard anyone come up the stairs. "It's found you," Thomas said urgently. "The Shadow Walker, it feeds on the energy that connects the paintings to our realm. You have to get out of there. Now." The footsteps stopped outside her door. Sarah heard the sound of her locks turning, though she was certain she had secured them. Her door opened with a soft creak, and something stepped into her apartment. Something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Experience more heart-pounding supernatural encounters. Follow us for exclusive stories of otherworldly phenomena and mysterious entities that defy explanation. Sarah grabbed the portrait and ran for her fire escape, not daring to look back at whatever had entered her home. As she climbed down the metal stairs, she could hear Thomas's voice calling from the painting. "The university. Dr. Hartwell has protections. Get to her office." The night air was cold against her haze. As she ran through empty streets, the portrait clutched against her chest. Behind her, she could sense rather than see the Shadow Walker following, a presence that seemed to drain warmth from the air around it. Dr. Hartwell's office building was locked, but Sarah's desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She found a window that had been left slightly open and managed to climb inside, cutting her hands on the glass in her haste. The professor's office felt different at night. The books and artifacts seemed to hum with protective energy. Sarah set the portrait on Dr. Hartwell's desk and immediately felt the oppressive presence of the Shadow Walker. "Retreat. Smart girl." Thomas's voice came from the painting, clearer now than it had ever been. "Hartwell's been collecting protective artifacts for decades. This room is warded against entities like the Shadow Walker." Sarah collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking. "What is that thing? And why is it after the paintings? The Order thought they were creating tools for exploration," Thomas explained. "They wanted to map other dimensions, to communicate with beings from parallel worlds, but they didn't understand the risks. When you create a bridge between worlds, sometimes things cross over that shouldn't. The Shadow Walker is one of those things. It's what's left of someone who tried to use the rings to travel between dimensions. The process changed him. Now he exists partially in both worlds, feeding on the energy that powers the connections. Each painting he destroys makes him stronger and traps souls, like mine forever." Sarah looked at the ring in the portrait, its symbols now forming complex patterns that seemed to tell a story. "How many paintings are left?" 3, including mine. The Shadow Walker has been hunting them for decades. He found the first one in 1987, a portrait of a young woman named Catherine Mills. The second was destroyed just 5 years ago. Sarah's blood ran cold. 5 years ago. That's when Marcus Widmore sealed the attic. Marcus was the last guardian of my painting. His family has been protecting it for generations, but the burden finally broke him. He could sense the Shadow Walker getting closer. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside made them both freeze. But these were different. Human footsteps, accompanied by the jingle of keys. "Hartwell," Sarah breathed in relief. As the professor's voice called out, "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I felt the words activate. Dr. Hartwell entered her office, took one look at Sarah's terrified face and the glowing portrait, and immediately began pulling books from her shelves. "It started, hasn't it?" she said grimly. "The final hunt. I've been preparing for this day for 20 years. She opened an ancient tome and began reading aloud in a language Sarah didn't recognize. The air in the room shimmered, and suddenly Thomas stepped out of the portrait, not as a reflection, but as a translucent figure standing in the office. "Elizabeth," he said, nodding to the professor. "It's good to see you again." Sarah stared in shock. "You two know each other?" Hartwell smiled sadly. "Thomas has been my research partner for 2 decades. He's the one who's been helping me understand the Order's work, guiding me to the protective artifacts that keep this office safe. And now, Thomas said, his form flickering like a candle flame, we need to find the third painting before the Shadow Walker does, because if he destroys all three anchor paintings, he'll have enough power to tear open permanent rifts between dimensions. And trust me, there are things in the other worlds that make the Shadow Walker look like a harmless ghost. Dr. Hartwell's office had been transformed into a war room. Ancient maps covered every surface, marked with symbols that seemed to shift when Sarah wasn't looking directly at them. Protective talismans hung from the ceiling, creating a web of defenses that made the air itself feel charged with power. The third painting is called The Merchant's Daughter, Dr. Hartwell explained, consulting a leather-bound ledger. It was commissioned by a wealthy industrialist named Jonathan Blackthorne in Minted. The subject was his daughter, Elena, who had reportedly been having visions of other worlds since childhood. Thomas's translucent form paced restlessly near the window, his attention divided between their conversation and watching for signs of the Shadow Walker. Elena was one of the most powerful sensitives the Order ever encountered. If her painting still exists, it would be incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands. Where is it now? Sarah asked, studying a genealogical chart that traced the Blackthorne family line. That's the problem, Dr. Hartwell said grimly. The Blackthorne estate was sold in 1977, the same year the first painting was destroyed. The contents were auctioned off to private collectors around the world. Elena's portrait could be anywhere. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. 1977. That's not a coincidence, is it? The Shadow Walker destroyed the first painting and then went after the collection that might contain the third. Exactly, but the auction records were deliberately obscured. Someone wanted to make sure the painting couldn't be easily traced. Thomas suddenly stiffened, his form becoming more solid as his attention focused on something outside. It's here. The Shadow Walker has found us. The protective talismans began to glow more brightly, and Sarah could feel a pressure building in the air, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Through the window, she could see a darkness moving between the buildings, not the natural darkness of night, but something that seemed to devour light itself. The wards will hold for now, Dr. Hartwell said, but her voice was tense. But we can't stay here indefinitely. We need to find that painting. Sarah had been studying the auction records, and something had caught her attention. Look at this. Later todos y 107, described as portrait of young woman, artist unknown, circa 1900. It was sold to a private collector in Salem. Salem, Thomas said, thoughtfully. That makes sense. The Order had connections there, old families with old money and older secrets. Dr. Hartwell was already pulling out her phone. I have contacts in the Salem art community. If the painting is there, we can find it. Uncover more secrets hidden in plain sight. Subscribe to our exclusive content for fascinating stories of lost artworks and the dangerous mysteries they conceal. While the professor made her calls, Sarah found herself drawn to study Thomas more closely. In the protective light of the office, she could see details that hadn't been visible in the portrait. There were symbols carved into his skin, faint but unmistakable, forming patterns that matched those on the ring. The marks, she said. They're not just on the ring. Thomas looked down at his translucent hands, where the symbols glowed faintly beneath his skin. The binding process. Blackwood didn't just paint my portrait. He marked me, made me part of the Aren system. Every person trapped in these paintings bears the same marks. It means Elena Blackthorne has them too. Yes, and if the Shadow Walker gets to her painting, he'll absorb not just the energy of the anchor, but the power of her sensitivity as well. She was far more gifted than I ever was. Dr. Hartwell ended her call with a grim expression, I found it. The painting is in the private collection of a man named Eldridge Crane. He's a reclusive who lives in a mansion outside Salem. But there's a problem. 3 days ago, he called the local police reporting strange disturbances on his property. Shadows moving where there shouldn't be shadows. Voices speaking in unknown languages. The shadow walker is already there, Thomas said. But why hasn't it taken the painting yet? Maybe it can't, Sarah suggested. Maybe Crane has protections of his own. Dr. Hartwell nodded slowly. The Crane family has been collecting occult artifacts for generations. It's possible their mansion has natural defenses. Then we have a chance, Thomas said. But we need to move now, before the Shadow Walker finds a way through whatever protections exist. As they prepared to leave, Sarah felt a strange sensation. A tugging in her mind, as if something was calling to her. She looked at the portrait, now empty of Thomas's presence, and realized the ring was glowing more brightly than ever. Thomas, she said urgently, the ring in your painting. It's reacting to something. Thomas appeared beside her, his form flickering with agitation. It's Elena. She's trying to communicate across the connection between the painting. She knows we're coming. The symbols on the painted ring began forming words that appeared in Sarah's mind. Hurry. The darkness grows stronger. I cannot hold it much longer. Dr. Hartwell gathered her protective artifacts while Sarah carefully wrapped Thomas's portrait. As they prepared to leave the safety of the office, Thomas caught Sarah's arm with a touch that felt like curled mist. Sarah, there's something you need to know. The reason you can see me, the reason you can read the symbols, it's not just sensitivity. You have Blackwood's blood. You're his descendant. Sarah stared at him in shock. That's impossible. Blackwood had a daughter who survived him. She changed her name, moved across the country, tried to escape the legacy of what her father had done. But the gift passes through bloodlines. You're not just witnessing this, you're part of it. As they stepped out into the night, heading for Hartwell's car, Sarah realized that everything she thought she knew about herself was about to change. The Shadow Walker was hunting the paintings, but it was also hunting her. She wasn't just trying to save Thomas and Elena. She was fighting for her own soul. The drive to Salem would take 3 hours. Sarah could only hope they would arrive before the darkness claimed its final prize. The Crane mansion loomed against the pre-dawn sky like something from a Gothic nightmare. Built in the 1800s, it sprawled across several acres of overgrown grounds. Its Victorian architecture twisted into impossible angles that hurt to look at directly. Even from the road, Sarah could feel the weight of the supernatural protection surrounding the property. The family has been at defenses for over a century, Dr. Hartwell explained as they parked at the rusted iron gates. Eldridge Crane is the last of his line, and he spent his entire inheritance on acquiring artifacts that keep unwanted entities at bay. Thomas's form flickered beside them, becoming more solid as they approached the mansion. I can feel Elena's presence. She's here, but she's weak. The Shadow Walker has been testing the defenses for days. The gates stood open, but not by choice. The iron had been twisted apart, as if by enormous hands, leaving jagged metal teeth pointing toward the sky. Beyond the gates, the gravel driveway was littered with what looked like the remains of protective talismans, crystals, carved stones, and metal amulets that had been drained of their power. It's broken through the outer defenses, Dr. Hartwell said grimly. We may be too late. They approached the mansion on foot, Sarah carrying Thomas's portrait, while Dr. Hartwell clutched a bag of her most powerful protective artifacts. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel under their feet and a sound like distant whispering that seemed to come from the mansion itself. The front door hung open, revealing a grand foyer lit by flickering candles. As they stepped inside, Sarah gasped at what she saw. The walls were covered with paintings, dozens of them, all portraits from different eras. But these weren't ordinary artworks. Each painting showed signs of supernatural activity. eyes that tracked movement, figures that shifted position when no one was watching, and an overall sense of barely contained energy. Crane wasn't just collecting art, Thomas observed. He was collecting anchors. Look at the symbols. Sarah followed his gaze and saw that every painting bore similar markings to those on Thomas's ring. Symbols that glowed faintly in the candlelight, creating a network of connections that spanned the entire room. "Mr. Crane?" Dr. Hartwell called out. "We're here to help," a voice answered from somewhere deeper in the mansion, weak but determined. "Upstairs, the gallery. I can't hold it much longer." They climbed a grand staircase lined with more portraits, each one adding to the supernatural tension in the air. At the top, they found a long gallery where a man in his 70s sat in a wheelchair, his hands pressed against the sides of his head, as if trying to block out unbearable noise. Aldrich Crane looked up as they approached, his eyes wild with exhaustion and fear. "You're too late. It's inside the house now. I've been fighting it for 3 days, but my strength is failing." At the far end of the gallery hung a portrait that made Sarah's breath catch. Elena Blackthorne had been beautiful, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. But now, in the painting, her expression was one of desperate struggle. The symbols on her ring were spinning so rapidly they appeared as a blur of light. "She's been fighting the Shadow Walker from inside the painting," Crane explained. "But every hour that passes, she grows weaker, and when she falls, the Shadow Walker will have access to all the anchors in your collection." Thomas finished. "Elena's sensitivity is amplifying the connections between all these paintings. If it claims her, it will be able to use your entire gallery as a gateway." As if summoned by their words, the temperature in the gallery plummeted. The candles flickered and dimmed, and a darkness began seeping through the walls themselves. Not the absence of light, but something that actively consumed illumination. The Shadow Walker emerged from the darkness like a nightmare given form. It had once been human, but the dimensional travel had twisted it into something else entirely. Its body seemed to shift between solid and ethereal, and where its face should have been, there was only a void that hurt to look at directly. "The final painting," it spoke with a voice like breaking glass. "And the bloodline of Blackwood. How convenient that you brought yourselves to me." Dr. Hartwell began chanting in the same ancient language she had used in her office, but here, surrounded by so many supernatural anchors, her protective spells seemed weak and ineffective. The Shadow Walker laughed, a sound that made the paintings on the walls writhe and shift. "Your protections are useless here, old woman. This place is saturated with dimensional energy. I am stronger than I have ever been." Thomas stepped forward, his translucent form blazing with sudden light. "You want the paintings? You'll have to go through me first." "Gully," the Shadow Walker replied, and launched itself at Thomas with inhuman speed. The two entities collided in the center of the gallery, their battle sending waves of energy through the air that made every painting in the room glow like stars. Sarah watched in horror as Thomas fought desperately against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. But then she noticed something. Elena's portrait was glowing brighter than all the others, and the symbols on her ring were forming words that appeared directly in Sarah's mind. "The connection. Use the connection. You are the key." Sarah looked down at Thomas's portrait in her hands, and suddenly understood. She wasn't just carrying a painting, she was carrying an anchor, a direct link to the dimensional energy that powered all of these supernatural connections. "Dr. Hartwell," she called out, "I need you to break the frame." "What?" "Sarah, this isn't the time. Trust me. Break the frame around Thomas's portrait." Dr. Hartwell pulled a small hammer from her bag of artifacts and struck the ornate frame. As the wood splintered, Sarah felt a surge of energy flow through her. The ring in the portrait blazed with light, and suddenly she could see the connections between all the paintings in the gallery, threads of energy that formed a complex web of power. And she realized that she could control them. The moment the frame shattered, Sarah felt the full weight of her heritage crash down upon her. She was no longer just an observer of the supernatural. She was a conduit, a living anchor point between dimensions. The blood of Blackwood flowed through her veins, and with it came abilities she had never imagined. The gallery erupted in light as every painting responded to her awakening power. The portraits that had been silent for decades suddenly came alive, their subjects stepping partially out of their frames. Sarah found herself surrounded by figures from across the centuries, men and women who had been trapped in dimensional limbo, all connected by the network of anchor paintings. Impossible, the Shadow Walker hissed, its battle with Thomas momentarily forgotten. The bloodline was severed. Blackwood's daughter renounced her heritage. She tried to, Sarah said, her voice carrying new authority. But some gifts can't be abandoned. They pass down through generations, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Elena's portrait blazed brighter than all the others, and suddenly she stepped fully out of the painting, her form solid and real. Unlike Thomas's translucent appearance, Elena seemed to have retained her full connection to the physical world. "Sister," she said to Sarah, her voice carrying the weight of a century's worth of imprisonment. "I have been waiting so long for you to awaken." "Sister?" Sarah stared at the woman who should have been long dead. "Not by blood, but by gift. We are both daughters of the dimensional path, both inheritors of Blackwood's vision. But where he saw only the possibility of exploration, we see the responsibility of protection." The Shadow Walker circled them warily, its form flickering between dimensions as it assessed this new threat. "You cannot stop me. I have consumed the energy of dozens of anchors. I am beyond your power." "Are you?" Elena asked, raising her hand. The ring on her finger, no longer just paint on canvas, but real metal and stone, began to glow. "You have consumed energy, yes, but you have never learned to truly control it." Sarah felt Elena's power joining with her own, and suddenly she could see the Shadow Walker for what it truly was. Not a monster, but a man who had been lost between dimensions for so long that he had forgotten his own humanity. The energy he had consumed over the decades was eating away at his essence, leaving only hunger and rage. "His name was Marcus Thorn," Elena said softly. "He was one of the Order's most promising members, until he tried to use the rings to travel to a dimension that should never have been explored." Thomas joined them, his form becoming more solid as the three anchors combined their power. "We can't destroy him," he said, "but we might be able to save him." "Save him?" Dr. Hartwell gasped from where she knelt beside Aldrich Crane. "That thing has been hunting and killing for decades, because he's lost," Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. "The dimensional energy is poison to him now, but he can't stop consuming it. He's addicted to the very thing that's destroying him." The Shadow Walker let out a roar of rage and launched itself at them. But this time Sarah was ready. She reached out with her newfound abilities and grasped the threads of energy that connected all the paintings in the gallery. With Elena and Thomas lending their strength, she began to weave those threads into something new, not a prison, but a healing web. The Shadow Walker struck their combined defenses and rebounded, its form flickering wildly. "What are you doing?" "What we should have done a century ago," Elena replied. "We're bringing you home." The healing web surrounded the Shadow Walker, and for the first time in decades, its form began to stabilize. The consuming darkness that had defined it started to recede, revealing glimpses of the man it had once been. Marcus Thorn had been young when he was lost, perhaps no older than Thomas, with kind eyes and a scholar's hands. I can't stop," Marcus whispered, his voice human for the first time. "The hunger, it never ends." "Then we'll help you carry it," Sarah said. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the dimensional energy that had been poisoning him for so long. But instead of destroying her, it flowed through her and into the network of anchor paintings, where it was absorbed and neutralized by the combined will of all the trapped souls. One by one, the figures in the paintings began to step fully into the physical world. They were no longer prisoners of the dimensional anchors. They were guardians, protectors who could move freely between worlds while maintaining their connection to this one. Marcus collapsed to his knees, his form finally stable and human. The consuming darkness was gone, replaced by exhaustion and overwhelming grief. What have I done? All those people, all those years. You were lost, Elena said gently, kneeling beside him. But now you're found, and now you can help us make sure this never happens again. Aldrich Crane struggled to his feet, supported by Dr. Hartwell. The paintings, he said wonderingly, they're not prisons anymore. They're not prisons anymore. They're guardians, protectors, Sarah confirmed. The Order's original vision, but done right this time. We can explore other dimensions safely, and we can protect our world from the things that shouldn't cross over. Thomas smiled, his form now solid and real. A new order, one that understands the responsibility that comes with power. As dawn broke over the Crane mansion, Sarah looked around at the gallery that had been transformed from a collection of supernatural artifacts into a headquarters for interdimensional guardians. She thought about her quiet life as an art appraiser, which now seemed like a distant memory. So what happens now? She asked. Elena gestured to the paintings that lined the walls, each one now showing not a trapped soul but a willing guardian. Now we learn, we explore, we protect, and we make sure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated, and the other anchor paintings, the ones that were destroyed, gone forever, Thomas said sadly. But the souls that were trapped in them have been freed. They can move on to whatever comes next. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of her new responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was no longer host Sarah Chen, art appraiser. She was Sarah Chen, guardian of the dimensional paths, inheritor of Hachi, Blackwood's legacy, and protector of the boundaries between worlds. It was a heavy burden. But as she looked around at her new family of guardians, she knew she wouldn't have to carry it alone. 6 months had passed since the events at the Crane mansion, and Sarah's life had been transformed beyond recognition. The mansion itself had become the headquarters of what they called the New Order of Guardians, or guardianization dedicated to protecting both dimensions from the dangers of uncontrolled interdimensional travel. The gallery had been expanded and renovated, with each painting now serving as both a window into other dimensions and a home for its guardian. Thomas had taken charge of training new sensitives, teaching them to safely navigate the paths between worlds. Elena focused on research, using her century of experience to map the dimensional landscape and identify potential threats. Marcus Thorne had become their most valuable member, his decades of consuming dimensional energy having given him unique insights into the darker corners of the multiverse. Under careful supervision, he helped identify and neutralize entities that posed threats to dimensional stability. Dr. Hardwell had officially retired from her university position to serve as the Order's historian and liaison with the academic world. Aldrich Crane, his health restored by the lifting of the supernatural burden he had carried for so long, had donated his entire estate to the cause, and Sarah had discovered that being a guardian was far more complex than she had initially imagined. Another breach in the Seattle area, she reported, hanging up the phone in what had once been Crane's study. A collector bought what he thought was a Victorian mirror at an estate sale. Turns out it's a scrying glass that's been showing him glimpses of a dimension where the laws of physics work differently. Thomas looked up from the ancient tome he was studying. Dangerous? Not immediately, but the prolonged exposure is starting to affect his perception of reality. He's been trying to recreate some of the impossible architecture he's seen. I'll take Marcus and investigate, Elena said, materializing from her portrait with the ease of long practice. This sounds like something from the Escher dimension. Beautiful but psychological hazardous to prolonged exposure. Sarah nodded, making notes in the ledger they used to track dimensional incidents. The work was never-ending. Despite their efforts to locate and secure dangerous artifacts, new ones surfaced regularly. The Order's original members had been prolific in their creation of dimensional anchors, and many had been lost or forgotten over the decades. There's something else, Sarah said. I've been getting reports of a new type of incident. People who have no connection to supernatural effects, suddenly developing sensitivity. It's happening all over the world. This caught everyone's attention. Thomas sat down his book, and even Marcus looked up from the dimensional map he was updating. How many cases? Elena asked. 17 confirmed in the last month. All of them young adults, all of them experiencing sudden onset of abilities similar to ours. They're seeing through dimensional barriers, communicating with entities from other worlds, some of them even accidentally opening small rifts. Dr. Hartwell frowned. That shouldn't be possible. Sensitivity is hereditary, passed down through bloodlines connected to the original Order member. Unless, Marcus said slowly, our activities here are having a wider effect. When we stabilized the dimensional network 6 months ago, we created a new equilibrium. Maybe that equilibrium is awakening latent abilities in Ephraim, who never would have manifested them before. Sarah felt a chill of realization. We're creating a new generation of sensitivists. People who have the abilities but none of the training or protection. Which means they're vulnerable, Thomas says grimly, to entities like what I used to be. To dimensional parasites, to anyone or anything that wants to exploit their abilities. Elena was already moving toward her portrait. We need to start recruiting, find these new sensitivities before something else does. Wait, Sarah said. There's more. 3 of the 17 cases have gone missing. Their families say they just vanished one day, leaving no trace. The room fell silent. They all knew what that likely meant. The new sensitivists were being hunted by something that understood their value. We need to expand our operations, Sarah said, feeling the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. We can't protect the dimensional boundaries from just one location. We need guardians in every major city, safe houses for new sensitivities, and a network that can respond to threats anywhere in the world. That's a massive undertaking, Dr. Hartwell said. We'd need funding, legal frameworks, international cooperation. Then we'd better get started, Sarah replied. She walked to the window and looked out over the grounds where they had begun training the first group of new recruits, young people who had manifested abilities and been brought to the mansion for protection and education. The original Order failed because they prioritized exploration over responsibility, she continued. They created tools without considering the consequences, opened doors without thinking about what might come through them. We won't make the same mistakes. Thomas joined her at the window. It won't be easy. There will always be people who want to use these abilities for personal gain, who see the other dimensions as resources to be exploited rather than realms to be respected. Then we'll stop them, Sarah said simply. That's what guardians do. Elena smiled, her form flickering slightly as she prepared to depart for Seattle. The bloodline of Blackwood was meant for this, Sarah. Your ancestor saw the potential for connection between worlds, but he lacked the wisdom to use it responsibly. You have both the gift and the understanding. As the sun set over the mansion, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that day in the dusty attic when she first encountered Thomas's portrait. She had been looking for a simple art appraisal and instead found her destiny. The ring on Thomas's finger, now a real artifact, rather than painted metal, caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through the window. Its symbols were calm now, no longer the frantic communications of a trapped soul, but the steady pulse of a guardian's heartbeat. Are you ready for this? Thomas asked quietly. Leading a global organization, protecting 2 worlds, training an army of sensitive. Sarah smiled, feeling the presence of all the guardians around her. Some in their portraits, some walking the halls of the mansion, all of them connected by bonds, stronger than blood or time. I don't think anyone could ever be ready for something like this, she said. But I'm not doing it alone. We're not the Order of the Eternal Moment, focused on individual achievement and exploration. We're the guardians of the threshold, and we protect each other as much as we protect the worlds. That night, as Sarah made her rounds through the gallery, Checking on each guardian and reviewing reports from around the world, she paused before the empty frame that had once held Thomas's portrait. It now served as a memorial to all the souls who had been lost to dimensional experiments over the years, a reminder of the price of careless ambition. But it also served as a window, showing glimpses of the work being done by guardians around the world. In London, a team was securing a Victorian music box that had been playing melodies from a dimension where sound had color. In Tokyo, guardians were helping a young sensitive learn to control her ability to see probability streams. In São Paulo, they were investigating reports of a painting that showed the viewer's death. The work would never end, but that was as it should be. The boundaries between worlds required constant vigilance, and the growing number of sensitivists needed guidance and protection. Sarah had inherited more than just H. Blackwood's abilities. She had inherited his responsibility to use those abilities wisely. As she prepared for bed, Sarah looked one last time at the portrait that had started it all. The painted Thomas smiled back at her, his image now serving as both a reminder of the past and a promise for the future. The ring on his finger glowed softly, its symbol spelling out a message that only she could read. The threshold is secure. The guardians watch. The worlds are safe. For now that was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new sensitivities to train and protect. But tonight Sarah Chen, guardian, protector, and inheritor of a legacy she was still learning to understand, could rest knowing that the boundaries between worlds were in good hands. The portrait that had looked so ordinary in that dusty attic had revealed its secrets, and in doing so had revealed Sarah's true purpose. Some mysteries were meant to be solved, some rings were meant to be understood, and some guardians were meant to stand watch between the worlds. The story of the Ring of Echoes had ended, but the story of the Guardians of the Threshold was just beginning.